They locked me away without a word, but what they didn't know was that I had hidden more than memories in that old safe, and when they finally found it, everything changed forever. I've always believed that old age creeps up on you, slowly, like ivy climbing a brick wall. One day you're trimming the hedges, and the next you're wondering why your knees sound like a bag of crisps every time you stand up. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for the day my life changed without warning. It was a Tuesday morning in Bath, one of those crisp English mornings where the light seems almost golden, filtering through the mist. I'd been up since 6, as I always was, making tea and reading the Times at my kitchen table. My house, my pride and joy, sat on a quiet street, lined with Georgian terraces. I'd lived there for 45 years. Every creak in the floorboards and every draught from the sash windows felt like an old friend. I remember I was buttering a slice of toast when I heard the knock at the door. It wasn't a friendly knock, either. It had that firm, purposeful rhythm of someone who's not going away until you answer. I shuffled to the front, tea still in hand, and opened the door. There stood my granddaughter, Lucy. She was smiling, but it wasn't her usual warm, wrinkled-nosed smile. This one was tight, like she was holding something back. Behind her were two strangers, one a tall man in a navy blazer, the other a woman in a beige cardigan who carried a clipboard. "Morning, Grandad," Lucy said, a little too cheerily. "How are you feeling today?" "I was feeling fine," I replied, raising an eyebrow, until I opened the door and found a welcoming committee. The man in the blazer stepped forward and introduced himself as David, from some sort of elder care service. The woman was Angela, a wellness coordinator. I didn't catch the name of their company. My mind was still trying to process why my granddaughter had brought two strangers to my doorstep. "Grandad," Lucy began, placing a hand on my arm, "I've been thinking. You've been living alone for quite a while now, and I just worry about you. It might be nice to have a little change of scenery, somewhere you don't have to worry about shopping or cooking." I chuckled. "Lucy, I've been cooking for myself since before you were born, and I enjoy shopping. Keeps me from buying too many biscuits." But she kept pressing. "Just a short stay, Grandad. Think of it as a little holiday. They've got gardens, activities, even bingo nights." Now, let me make something clear. I have nothing against bingo, but the way she said it, you'd think she was offering me a ticket to the Bahamas. I started to say no, but then David, the man in the blazer, spoke up. "Mr. Bennett, we've had a lovely room become available at Rosewood Care Home, just for a trial period. We can make sure you're safe, comfortable, no obligations at all." It sounded rehearsed, like they'd practiced this conversation before arriving. My gut told me something was off, but Lucy kept looking at me with those wide eyes, and for a moment I wondered if perhaps I was being stubborn. Then I noticed Angela, the woman with the clipboard, was glancing past me into the hallway, not in a casual, curious way, but like she was mentally mapping my home. "Give me a moment," I said, stepping back inside. I put my tea down, straightened my cardigan, and looked at myself in the hallway mirror. My reflection stared back at me, white hair, deep lines on my face, but eyes still sharp. I wasn't ready for someone else to decide how I'd spend my days. When I came back, Lucy was already holding my coat. "Just for a few days, Grandad, please." I should have said no. I should have asked more questions. But in that moment, the combination of her insistence and the stranger's polite smiles wore me down. I told myself I'd humor them, go along for a short visit, then come back home. We stepped outside, and I noticed the man in the blazer locking my front door for me. I didn't remember giving him my keys. As we drove through Bath, the familiar streets rolled past the cobblestones, the little cafes, the bookshop where I'd spent countless afternoons with Margaret before she passed. I felt a pang in my chest. My house wasn't just bricks and mortar, it was the container of my memories, my history, and now it was being left behind. The car ride was quiet for the most part. Lucy chatted about her job in Bristol, avoiding eye contact whenever I mentioned my house. The man and woman said almost nothing. I had the oddest sensation that we weren't heading somewhere I'd agreed to go, but somewhere they'd planned. For me, we arrived at Rosewood Care Home just before lunch. The building was modern, with big glass windows and a garden in front. On the surface, it looked pleasant enough, but as soon as we walked in, the smell hit me, that faint mix of disinfectant and boiled vegetables. I've always associated it with hospitals and care facilities. A woman at the front desk greeted us warmly and handed me a welcome packet, as if I'd signed up for a holiday package. My room was on the first floor, small space with a single bed, a wardrobe, and a window overlooking the car park. There were no personal touches, no signs of the life I'd built for myself. Lucy fussed over me for a few minutes, adjusting the curtains and asking if I needed anything. I could see she was in a hurry to leave. Finally, she kissed my cheek, said she'd visit in a few days, and was gone. And just like that, I was alone. I sat on the bed, my suitcase beside me, feeling more unsettled than I had in years. I thought about the way Angela had looked into my hallway. I thought about the fact that David had my keys, and I thought about the heavy safe hidden in the cellar, the one only I knew about. It was as if a thread had been pulled, unraveling the fabric of my quiet, predictable life. Something told me this wasn't just about my health or convenience. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Lucy's too bright smile, the stranger's polite but purposeful expressions, and my front door closing behind me. I didn't know it then, but that was the beginning of a chain of events that would lead to secrets uncovered, betrayals revealed, and a very clever little piece of revenge on my part. But for now, I was just an old man in a strange bed, wondering how quickly the world could shift under your feet without you even realizing it was moving. The first thing you notice about a place like Rosewood isn't the decor, or the smiling reception staff, or even the food. It's the sound door. More accurately, the lack of it. There's a stillness, a muffled quiet that's only broken by the squeak of a trolley wheel, the distant ring of a telephone, or the low hum of a television left on for company. At home, even when I was alone, there was life, the kettle boiling, pigeons cooing on the rooftop, the creak of my study chair when I leaned back. Here, the silence was different. It felt watchful. My room was small and tidy, functional in the way that hotel rooms are, but without the charm or the promise of leaving in a few days. I sat on the bed for a while that first afternoon, staring at the beige walls. Someone had tried to make the place cheerful by hanging a framed print of a meadow. It didn't work. It looked like a meadow that had been ironed flat. I decided to explore. The corridor outside was lined with identical doors, each with a small nameplate. Some doors were closed, others ajar, revealing glimpses of neatly made beds and armchairs positioned toward the window. A faint smell of furniture polish mixed with the sharper scent of disinfectant. As I walked, I passed a lounge where a handful of residents sat watching a daytime quiz show. A nurse in a pale blue uniform hovered nearby, smiling automatically whenever someone looked her way. That's when I met Nurse Patricia. She was in her 50s, with kind brown eyes and a brisk manner that suggested she got things done. She spotted me lingering in the doorway. "Mr. Bennett, isn't it? Settling in all right?" I managed a half smile, still deciding. She chuckled softly. "Well, it takes a bit of time. If you need anything at all, press the call button in your room. You'll find it near the bed." I nodded, though I had no intention of pressing that button unless the place caught fire. Not long after, a voice called from across the lounge, "New blood." I turned to see an older man in a battered cardigan beckoning me over. His hair was silver and his grin mischievous. "Name's Doyle," he said, offering his hand. "Royal Navy. And you are?" "Arthur Bennett," I replied, shaking his hand. "Well, Arthur, welcome to Rosewood. Population, us, the nurses, and a few folks who think they're still in 1972. We sat together for a while, watching the quiz show. He filled me in on the residents, the woman who collected teaspoons from the dining hall, the man who refused to wear socks, the lady who sang old pub songs after dinner. Doyle had a way of making it sound like we were in on a private joke. But then, mid-sentence, his eyes flicked toward the hallway. I followed his gaze and saw two care workers walking past, speaking in low voices. I couldn't make out the words, but I caught one phrase clearly: his house. Something tightened in my chest. I leaned toward Doyle. "Did you hear that?" He shrugged, though his expression said yes. "Staff talk about all sorts. You'd be surprised what slips out when they think you're not listening." The rest of the afternoon passed in a haze. I ate dinner, overcooked carrots, mashed potatoes, and a piece of fish that might have been cod in another life in a communal dining room. Lucy hadn't returned, and no one had explained exactly how long I'd be here that night. I unpacked my suitcase. I'd only brought a few clothes, some toiletries, and a book Margaret had given me for our 25th anniversary. The rest of my life, everything that made my home mine was still in Bath, and, as far as I knew, so was the safe in the cellar. Before bed, I sat by the window and looked out over the car park. A single street lamp lit the empty asphalt. Beyond that, the night pressed in, silent and heavy. I couldn't shake the feeling that my world had been reduced to this small rectangle of light and shadow. In the days that followed, I developed a routine. Breakfast at 8, a walk in the garden if the weather allowed, lunch at noon, tea. At 4, Doyle became my regular companion, and I learned that behind his jokes was a sharp mind. He noticed things: who came and went, which staff seemed nervous, which residents had visitors who never stayed long. It was on the 4th day that I heard it again. I was passing the nurse's station when 2 young carers were talking. "Her granddaughter's been going in and out of the place all week," one said, sorting through his things. "I reckon," the other replied. "She's got the keys." I kept walking, but my heart was pounding. Lucy, my Lucy, the little girl who used to sit on my shoulders to watch the Christmas parade. She was in my house, going through my things. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The truth was beginning to form, piece by piece, like a jigsaw puzzle I didn't want to complete. They hadn't brought me here for my health. They brought me here to get me out of the way. Doyle noticed I was quiet the next morning. We sat in the garden, watching a robin hop along the path. "You're thinking about home," he said. I looked at him. "I think something's going on, Doyle. My granddaughter's been in my house. Staff keep mentioning it, and I never agreed to stay here this long." He leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing. "You've got something worth taking, haven't you?" I hesitated. "Maybe." He nodded slowly. "Then you'd better keep your ears open and your mouth shut. Places like this, people assume you're harmless. That's your advantage. Don't waste it." It was good advice. I decided to follow it. From that day on, I started paying closer attention to the whispers in the hallways, the glances between staff, the occasional slip of the tongue. I didn't know yet what I would do with the information, but I knew one thing: I wasn't going to sit quietly while someone picked my life apart, piece by piece, and if they were looking for the safe, well, they were in for a surprise. The days at Rosewood had settled into an uneasy rhythm, but my mind was elsewhere, back at my house in Bath, where the walls held decades of memories. That house wasn't just a place to live. It was a sanctuary filled with echoes of my past, of Margaret, of the life we built together. I thought about the heavy cellar door in the kitchen, the one I'd spent countless hours reinforcing with new locks and hidden bolts. Behind it was the metal safe, old but sturdy, the one that had been passed down through generations. My father, a man of quiet strength and few words, had entrusted it to me shortly before he passed. Inside that safe were my treasures, not just objects, but pieces of a lifetime. There were medals from the war, worn and tarnished, each one telling a story of battles fought and brothers lost. There was a small stack of gold sovereign coins, their edges smooth from years of handling, the kind you don't see much anymore, except in old stories. And there were letters, hundreds of them written in Margaret's delicate handwriting. Letters we exchanged during the long years I was away at war, and afterward, in the quiet days of rebuilding our life. I'd hidden the safe carefully, aware that time hadn't been kind to my memory or my health. I wasn't naive enough to think the world outside was filled with angels. There were people with greed in their hearts, people who would take what wasn't theirs if given the chance. And so I had protected my past, my legacy, as best I could. I remembered the last time I'd been down there, running my fingers over the cold metal door, whispering a promise to keep these memories safe for as long as I could. Now, those memories felt fragile, threatened by the very people I should be able to trust. The thought of Lucy, my own flesh and blood, rummaging through those rooms was unbearable. Had she forgotten the stories I told her as a boy, the nights we spent in that very kitchen, eating Marg's lemon cake, while I told her about my father and his safe? I knew she wanted something, though I wasn't sure what. Money, perhaps, or maybe just control. Either way, I wasn't going to let it be so easy. During the first week at Rosewood, I had little to do but think. I read and reread the few books I'd brought, but my thoughts always drifted back to my house. I thought of the railway maps framed on the walls, the grandfather clock that chimed on the hour, and the garden where Margaret planted roses each spring. I could almost smell the faint scent of those roses. Even here, I had to find a way to hold on to what was mine physically and spiritually. One afternoon, Doyle found me staring out the window, lost in thought. "You've got a stubborn streak," he said, breaking the silence. I smiled weakly. "Stubbornness is what's kept me alive this long." He nodded approvingly. "Good, you'll need it." The following days were filled with small discoveries. I learned the routines of the staff, who came in early, who stayed late, who looked the other way when certain residents needed extra attention. I learned which nurses had a soft spot for us, and which ones seemed too busy to care. But it was the whispers I overheard in the corridors that made my heart race. "They're sorting through his things tomorrow. Did you see the keys? Came in with the granddaughter. Safe's in the cellar. Heard it rattled when they moved the furniture." The safe. That one word sent a shiver down my spine. I realized then that the time to act was coming. I couldn't stay passive. If they were going to dig through my house, find the safe, and take my memories away, I had to be ready. But how? I was an old man, confined within these walls, with no power over my own fate. My body was frail, my hands trembling, but my mind, thankfully, was as sharp as it ever was. That night, I reached into my suitcase and pulled out a small notebook and a pencil. I began to write not just facts and observations, but stories, names, dates. I documented everything I could remember about the safe, its contents, and the house. Writing it down felt like planting a seed. Even if they took the house, even if they took the safe, the story would remain. I wrote about Margaret, her laugh, her kindness, the way she braided my hair one summer when I was a boy. I wrote about my father, a stern but loving man who taught me the value of silence and strength. I wrote about the medals, the coins, and the letters, the irreplaceable pieces of a life lived fully. As I wrote, I felt a sense of calm. The safe was not just metal and locks. It was a symbol of my past, and I still had control over its story. One evening, Nurse Patricia knocked on my door and brought tea. She lingered longer than usual, asking if I was settling in. "I miss my home," I admitted quietly. She nodded sympathetically. "It's hard, I know, but you're safe here." I wanted to believe her. I really did. But safety wasn't just about being protected from falls or illness. It was about being able to live on your own terms. That night, I resolved to find a way back to my home, not just physically, but emotionally. I started speaking more with Doyle, confiding in him little by little. He told me about his own battles, both in war and with family. He understood what it was like to feel powerless, to have your life controlled by others. Together, we talked about plans, not escape plans, exactly, but ways to keep our dignity and our secrets. I learned that Lucy's visits to my house were more frequent than I'd thought. She wasn't just checking in, she was searching. But what if I could outsmart her? I remembered a trick my father had taught me, a secret compartment beneath the floorboards, designed to fool even the most determined thief. It was there I'd hidden the most precious items years ago, long before I'd sealed the safe in the cellar. If anyone came searching, they'd find the safe, yes, but they wouldn't find the real treasure. I allowed myself a small, secret smile. Even here, within the cold walls of Rosewood, I still had a few tricks left. The memories I'd fought so hard to protect weren't just locked behind steel. They were etched in my heart, and I was ready to fight for them in ways no one expected. Living in Rosewood Care Home was like existing in a world where every sound mattered, every quiet conversation, every slip of a voice behind closed doors. I quickly learned that in a place like this, whispers carried more weight than shouted commands, and eavesdropping wasn't just a bad habit, it was survival. My body was weak, and my legs no longer took me far, but my ears thankfully were as sharp as ever, so I began to listen. It started innocently enough. One afternoon, as I sat in the garden near the bench where Doyle liked to smoke his pipe, I overheard two staff members talking. I had been pretending to read a magazine, but my attention was elsewhere. "She's been going in and out of his house all week," said a young carer with a nervous voice. "Sorting through his things, I reckon," replied another, her tone low. My heart skipped a beat. My house, my things. I had to know more. Days passed, and I tuned in to every conversation I could without looking suspicious. The trick was to appear distracted, his wandering, lost in thought while catching every word. I wasn't the only one skilled in this. Doyle was a master eavesdropper, with a grin that made him look like he knew all the secrets in the world. One evening, as the sun was setting and casting long shadows across the garden, I saw two staff members whispering near the entrance to the lounge. I edged closer under the guise of taking a slow walk and caught the tail end of their talk. "Did you hear? The granddaughter has the keys. They're planning to go through the cellar next." My stomach twisted. They were moving fast, faster than I'd imagined. Back in my room, I sat down and tried to piece together what I'd heard. Lucy had my keys. She'd been going through my things. The safe was in the cellar, and soon they'd be inside it. I felt a cold wave of panic wash over me, but panic wasn't useful. I had to think clearly. That night, I decided to write a letter, one last attempt to reach out to Lucy directly, in case she ever read it. I wrote carefully, pouring my heart onto the page, reminding her of the love we once shared, begging her to think twice before tearing apart my life. I tucked the letter deep inside my jacket pocket, unsure if it would ever reach her hands. Meanwhile, life at Rosewood went on with its routines. I made small talk with other residents, shared cups of tea, and listened to the whispers that floated through the halls. One afternoon, Nurse Patricia came to check on me. She seemed more anxious than usual, glancing around before speaking in a hushed tone. "Arthur, there's something you should know," she said carefully. I leaned in. "What is it?" "Your house. It's being prepared for renovation. There's talk about selling it." I blinked, stunned. "Selling? Without my consent?" She shrugged. "I don't know the details, but the paperwork has been moving quickly. I thought you should hear it from me." The weight of that news crushed me. My home, my memories, my sanctuary, being sold like a piece of furniture. That evening, Doyle found me sitting quietly in the lounge. "They're trying to take everything," I told him, voice low. He frowned. "Then you've got to be smarter. Let them think they're winning. Sometimes, that's how you win." I realized he was right. I couldn't stop what was happening, but I could control how it ended. I began watching Lucy more closely during her visits. She came less often than I expected, but each time she did, I saw the way she saw just the rooms, but my papers, my belongings. One day, I overheard a conversation between two workers in the kitchen. They found the safe. One whispered. My breath caught, but Doyle warned me to stay calm. "Not all treasures are where they seem. You remember your father's tricks." I did. The secret compartment beneath the floorboards, the hidden stash. I smiled to myself. The safe might be found, but the real secret was still safe. The days grew longer, the tension thicker, but I was ready. Even in this place, surrounded by strangers, I held on to my memories. I held on to my past, and I was waiting for the moment to take back control. Life in Rosewood Care Home had a way of making you feel invisible, like a forgotten bookmark left between the pages of someone else's story. But not everyone was forgotten here. I found, much to my relief, that I wasn't the only one fighting battles behind these beige walls. That battle, I soon learned, was shared by Doyle, a silver-haired gentleman with a grin as wide as the Thames and a wit sharper than most. He was more than a fellow resident. He became my unexpected ally. Our friendship began on a day much like any other. I was sitting by the window, tracing the raindrops as they slid down the glass, when Doyle shuffled over, pipe in hand and a mischievous glint in his eye. "Looking a bit gloomy there, Arthur," he said. "I'm thinking about my home," I replied, sighing. He pulled up a chair and settled beside me. "That's the trick, isn't it? This place makes you think you're trapped, but you're not if you're smart." I raised an eyebrow. "And what's the secret to being smart in a place like this?" He grinned. "Eavesdropping, my friend, and patience." Doyle was a retired Royal Navy officer, full of stories from the sea and sharp insights about people. He'd been at Rosewood for over a year after his own family tried to wrest control of his affairs. Like me, he'd felt powerless when those closest to him seemed more interested in his belongings than his well-being. We spent hours talking about our pasts, our regrets, and our plans. I told him about the safe in my cellar and the letters from Margaret. He shared stories of lost medals and misplaced honor. There was a comfort in knowing someone else understood the quiet wars we were fighting. One afternoon, Doyle leaned in close and whispered, "You've got to keep your guard up. Watch the staff, watch the visitors, especially those with keys and smiles that don't quite reach their eyes." That was when I realized Lucy's visits weren't casual check-ins. They were calculated. Every time she came by, I watched her. She examined my belongings, scribbled notes, and made phone calls from the house. Together, Doyle and I began piecing things together. We learned which staff members were loyal, which ones were indifferent, and which might be tempted to help Lucy for a favor or two. It was during one of our quiet talks in the garden that Doyle said something that stuck with me. Sometimes, the best way to win is to let them think they're winning. Make them believe the prize is just out of reach, then pull it away when they least expect. I nodded slowly. That was exactly what I intended to do. Our plan was simple but required patience. Doyle kept an ear to the ground, gathering whispers and rumors from the staff. I wrote detailed notes about who came and went, what was said, and when. Meanwhile, I began to test Lucy's patience. During one visit, I pretended not to notice when she hinted at selling the house. I even asked naive questions about the future, making her believe I was oblivious. Behind the scenes, though, I was setting traps, figurative ones. Of course, I contacted a trusted solicitor in London, explaining my situation and arranging for legal documents to be prepared, securing my rights to the property. Doyle helped too. He taught me how to read people better, how to pick up on subtle signs like a nervous glance or a too quick change of subject. One day, I overheard a conversation that chilled me to the bone. Two staff members were talking about the day they planned to empty my cellar. The safe was their target, they said. That night, I thought about the secret compartment beneath. The floorboard's the one that held the true treasures, hidden long ago. I felt a spark of hope. If they found the safe, they'd think they'd won. But the real story was still mine. Doyle and I started to prepare. I gathered small personal items, old photos, a pocket watch from Margaret, and hid them in clever places within the home. Doyle lent me a small lockbox he'd brought with him, the kind used by sailors to keep letters safe at sea. I began to spread rumors gently among other residents, suggesting that my old friend Doyle had connections outside the home, that there were people ready to intervene if anything untoward happened. It was a game of shadows, deception, and quiet resilience. Lucy continued her visits, unaware that the old man she tried to control was plotting his quiet revenge. One afternoon, as I sat in the garden watching the sun filter through the leaves, Doyle came over with a sly grin. "They're moving faster than we thought," he said. I frowned. "What do you mean?" "They're planning to go through the cellar next week. They've already brought in movers to shift the furniture." My heart raced, but I kept calm. "Then it's time." With Doyle's help, I drafted a letter sealed and addressed to Lucy, to be opened only if she tried to claim what wasn't hers. It was a legal statement, prepared by my solicitor, asserting my ownership and warning of consequences if anyone attempted to steal or sell the property. We hid the letter in the secret compartment beneath the floorboards, the place no one would think to look. As the day approached, Doyle and I stayed vigilant. I felt a renewed strength, something I hadn't felt in months. I wasn't just a forgotten old man. I was a man protecting his legacy, and with Doyle by my side, I knew I had an ally who would stand with me till the end. The day they found it is etched in my memory like a scar that never quite fades. I'd sensed for days that the moment was drawing near. The hushed conversations, the furtive glances, the unusual hustle around the house, it all culminated in one inevitable conclusion. The safe was about to be uncovered. It was a grey morning, the kind of day when the sky presses down low and the rain threatens without quite delivering. I woke early, unable to shake the knot of anxiety coiling in my stomach. The usual clatter of breakfast trays was muted, replaced by a strange tension in the air. Nurse Patricia appeared at my door just after breakfast. She looked unsettled, a flicker of worry behind her professional smile. "Arthur," she said quietly, "there's been some movement regarding your house. The people in charge have started sorting through your things." I nodded, trying to keep my voice steady. I feared as much. Her eyes softened. "If there's anything you want me to know, or if you need help here, I'm here for you." I thanked her, but I knew this was something I'd have to face alone. The hours crawled by, each minute heavier than the last. Doyle sat with me in the lounge, his usual jovial self, muted by the weight of what was to come. We talked little, our silence a shared acknowledgement of the impending storm. Then came the call. The receptionist told me a visitor was here to see me. I wasn't surprised to see Lucy walk in, but the smile she wore felt strange to practiced, too bright, as if hiding something beneath. She sat down beside me and took my hand, but I could feel the coldness beneath her touch. "We need to talk about the house, Grandad," she said, eyes fixed on mine. I took a breath, steadying myself. "Go ahead." Lucy told me they'd found the safe in the cellar and had been through most of the rooms. She spoke as if recounting a business transaction, not the invasion of a lifetime. I listened quietly, letting her words wash over me, all the while feeling the sting of betrayal. But beneath the hurt was a simmering resolve. They had found the safe, but they hadn't found everything. Later, as Lucy left, I let her believe I was unaware of the full truth. I was playing a long game, one that required patience and cunning. That evening, Doyle and I discussed what to do next. "I'm glad you had that letter prepared," he said. "It could be the key to setting things right." I nodded. "It's not just a letter. It's a declaration of my rights and a warning." The letter was tucked away safely in the secret compartment beneath the floorboards, far from prying eyes. Days later, word spread through Rosewood that there'd been a legal visit. A solicitor came by to deliver documents and remind everyone that the house and its contents were under my protection. Lucy received a formal notice, informing her of my ownership and cautioning against any attempts to sell or misuse the property. She didn't come back after that. As for me, I felt a surge of relief and vindication. The safe was a symbol, but the true treasure was the respect and dignity I had fought to reclaim. Sitting by the window that evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink, I thought of Margaret and my father, their lessons, their love, and the legacy they'd entrusted to me. I was still here, still standing, still fighting, and the day they found the safe, it was the day they discovered the old man was far from defeated. They thought they'd uncovered everything, the safe in the cellar, my secret trove, the prize they'd been hunting for all this time. But what they didn't expect was that the real treasure wasn't there anymore. The day they found the safe, I watched from Rosewood with a quiet satisfaction. Lucy came to visit, her smile too bright, her eyes darting with a mixture of triumph and impatience. She told me about the safe, how it was heavier than she expected, how they'd cracked it open without much trouble. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that years ago, when I first sensed that my world was changing, I'd made a decision. I had emptied the safe. I remembered sitting in the dim light of my cellar late one night, the musty smell of old bricks and damp air around me. Carefully, I had taken out every medal, every coin, every letter, and moved them to a safer place, one no one would ever think to look. The safe remained, a hollow shell, a decoy for anyone foolish enough to believe it held the key to my past. Inside the safe now was only an old pocket watch, its glass scratched, and its hands frozen at 11:15, the exact time Margaret took her last breath. Alongside it was a faded photograph of us, young and smiling, standing outside the railway station, where I worked, and a sealed envelope labeled, "For whoever tries to take what isn't theirs." The envelope contained a letter I'd written years ago, but only planned to use if the day ever came when someone tried to steal my legacy. I had given copies of this letter to my solicitor in London, who was prepared to act the moment it was needed. The letter outlined my legal ownership of the house and its contents, declared the actions of anyone attempting to take or sell my possessions without my consent as fraudulent, and warned of the serious legal consequences they would face. It was a shield and a sword. When Lucy and the others opened the safe and found only these relics, their faces fell. The gleam of greed was replaced by confusion and frustration. They had expected gold, wealth, maybe a fortune hidden away. Instead, they found memories, intangible, yet priceless to me. The day after their discovery, a solicitor arrived at Rosewood. He was a tall man, wearing a crisp suit and carrying a briefcase. I watched from the common room as he spoke firmly with the staff and eventually handed Lucy a thick envelope. I didn't hear what was said, but I saw Lucy's face pale. She didn't visit me again after that. I felt a strange mixture of relief and sorrow. Relief that my past, my memories, was safe. Sorrow that it had come to this, that my own granddaughter, the girl I had loved so much, had tried to take from me what no one should touch. That night, I sat by the window in my room, the quiet hum of Rosewood around me. I held the pocket watch in my hand, feeling the weight of years and love. I thought of Margaret and the life we built together. I thought of my father and the lessons he passed on about honor, resilience, and the quiet strength of a man who keeps his promises. And I thought about the future, because even though I was here, in this place I hadn't chosen, I had won in my own way. I had protected what mattered most. They didn't expect me to be ready. They didn't expect that I had a plan. They didn't expect that an old man, confined and underestimated, could still outsmart those who thought they had the upper hand. And so, the real treasure, the memories, the love, the legacy, remained where it always belonged. with me. The days that followed the discovery of the empty safe were quieter than I'd expected. Lucy never came back to Rosewood, and the legal letters she received seemed to have shaken her resolve. But I knew the fight wasn't over, not yet. There were still battles to be won, and a freedom to reclaim. Living here, in the care home, I was supposed to be a man confined, limited by age, by health, by circumstance. But I had something no one could take from me: my mind, my will, and a plan. It began quietly. I started making phone calls from the communal phone, the one I was allowed to use for a limited time each week. I reached out to old friends, to solicitors, and even to an old journalist I once met at a local event. I told my story, in small pieces at first, careful with my words. I wanted someone to know the truth, that I hadn't simply been placed in this home for my safety, but that my own family had tried to erase me, to take what was mine. Word started to spread, and soon I was no longer just that quiet old man at Rosewood. I became a figure of quiet resistance. The staff who once dismissed me began to listen, and some even helped me. Nurse Patricia, in particular, was a steadfast ally. She believed in my story and helped me gather evidence, copies of documents, records of Lucy's visits, and the timeline of events that led to my being here. Together, we crafted a letter, not just a warning, but a public statement. It was a call for justice, a plea for dignity for all elders like me who had been pushed aside, forgotten, or worse. The day the letter was published in the local newspaper, I felt a rush of something I hadn't felt in years: hope. People began to call Rosewood, asking questions. Local authorities stepped in to investigate. And most importantly, Lucy's plans were brought to light. But freedom, I learned, isn't just about leaving a place. It's about reclaiming your life. With the help of my solicitor, I arranged for a mediator to meet with Lucy. The meetings were tense, filled with old wounds and difficult conversations. But slowly, we began to rebuild a fragile understanding. I didn't expect miracles. I knew that some things couldn't be undone, but I wanted peace. And in the end, I found it. A few weeks later, I returned home. Walking through the front door of my house in Bath, the familiar creak of the floorboards underfoot, the scent of the garden's roses blooming through the open windows, it was as if time had folded back on itself. The house was mine again. The memories, the safe, the hidden compartment, all intact. Lucy wasn't there. She'd moved on, but I didn't hold bitterness in my heart. Instead, I focused on what truly mattered. My freedom was more than just the walls I lived in. It was the dignity I had fought to keep, the love that had never truly left me, and the promise that no one could erase my story. I sat in my favorite armchair, holding the pocket watch Margaret had given me years ago. The hands, still frozen at 11:15, a reminder of loss, yes, but also of endurance. In that moment, I understood that revenge wasn't about anger or spite. It was about standing tall, reclaiming your voice, and living on your own terms. I was no longer the man they thought I was. I was Arthur Bennett, and this was mystery.